Welcome to the Psychedelic Passage podcast. My name is Nick Levitch. I'm here with my co-host Jimmy Nguyen. Thanks for joining us today. This week, what we are talking about is, are you prepared to sit with stuff that you didn't know was there? And this is a
I'm already laughing.
well, this happens a lot. I think that's why I feel called to make an episode around this. Is one of the things that we see a lot, especially with those who are suffering or in some state of distress, is they're like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to feel better. I'm willing to get in there. I'm willing to look under the hood. I'm willing to clear whatever's in the way so that I can feel better, which sounds great. And then sometimes stuff comes up that we weren't prepared for as a journeyer. And a lot of times that can have this effect of making us feel like we're blindsided. And oftentimes what I've heard from clients firsthand when this process happens is, well, now I just wish I didn't do that. I wish I didn't find out that that was there. I wish I didn't know. I wish I could just, rewind time and just continue on from a place of, this kind of like ignorance is bliss mentality. And that doesn't always last. A lot of time I see folks come around once they've settled from the shock of the discovery, if you will.
Yeah.
But this is definitely something that every single journeyer has to be prepared for if they're going to embark on an intentional ceremonial journey.
Yeah, well, I mean, the last part of what you're talking about is the resistance. Like the client has some resistance once they have that.
But it's after the fact.
Right.
That's
They
what's so
have the
interesting.
discovery. It's already uncomfortable, and they're like, "Oh fuck! I wish I would have went back." But the cat's out of the bag, and so it doesn't.
And the thing is, the only option once the cat's out of the bag is to deal with it, because
right.
once you have the
So lean
awareness
into
around it and you shove it down, that creates even more harm. And so it's this thing where like you really got to ask yourself, am I ready, willing, and able to accept whatever comes up, even if I didn't even know it was there?
Yeah. The reason why I was laughing at the beginning of this episode was that this has been coming up a lot with my clients, and they've been discovering their own, like, almost like, I've been calling it like hallmarky or like cliche types of phrases where they're like expecting the unexpected, or like, you know um knowing the unknown, and it creates a really interesting, almost like a paradox. Like, how do you prepare for what you're not aware of or what you don't know? And how do you then navigate that if it does come up? And so I think what would be helpful today is to break it down, I think, into some of the philosophy framework behind this, and then we'll talk to you all about some tangible pieces, some actionable things in which you can start in the preparation process even before you get into ceremony. And I guess the first thing that I would share with folks is that uh, for many folks that I work with moving into a psychedelic experience, I have to remind them that this is a process that I say is beyond the mind, that they're not going to be able to like think and analyze their way completely through the process. And that's not to say that thinking and being critical and being strategic isn't important in this process, but I feel like a lot of journeyers kind of rely on it as their only tool. And so knowing that the mind is, at least the active mind, is only aware of, to a degree, like what's in front of it, right? Like there's a level of content that's beyond like mental thinking awareness. And I think I'd first just acknowledge that any and all of that can come up in the psychedelic experience. And so that's the first thing that I would share with folks, is that it's also about engaging with what's beyond the mind. I think about the body, I think about emotions, I think about just some things in folks is like unconscious as well. And then it's like, okay, how do I build some tools around that so that whatever comes up, I then have some framework around how to like deal with it or how to navigate it. And um it's also different for each person. Like I have a lot of folks who are like, yep, I've done all of the inventory, I've done all of the deep searching, like I really feel like I got it all, there. Undoubtedly, those are also the folks in ceremony who are like, I didn't realize I was there and I'm having this release process, and oh, thank goodness, like that's happening too.
I mean, I think part of what you're describing to me is that if you're using your conscious thinking mind to try and guess what's going to come up, you're never going to access it, because what we're talking about here is the subconscious stuff. It's the stuff that is fundamentally unavailable to your thinking mind. And so what happens is a journeyer like that in prep, all through prep, is thinking of all the possible things that can come up with their cognitive thinking mind. And then it's not until they get into ceremony where the kind of default mode network is taken offline, start to get access to the subconscious stuff. And then lo and behold, there it is, the childhood abuse or whatever it was that's been kind of wreaking havoc beneath the surface. And so this is the irony, is like the thinking mind is not going to have access to that in our normal default state. And it's not until we embark on a journey like this that, oh my goodness, look at what's underneath the surface, all this stuff that we didn't know was there. And how could we? Because it was existing on a deeper
Mm.
level than our thinking mind.
Yeah, and it reminds me of our trauma episode that we did a little bit further back, where there can be what was called like big T trauma, like big events, large traumatic
The stuff that people
issues
normally think
and
about.
events. Yeah. But
Yeah.
then there's also small little residual pieces of trauma. Maybe you've built resentment in a relationship over years, or maybe you've built beliefs about yourself that sit there unconsciously. And so it can also be the accumulation of all of these little micro, I
Well,
think,
I mean,
traumas.
I use this one a lot, but like not getting breast milk when you needed it as a child can leave that mark. Being left alone when what you wanted was physical nourishment. Like all those little things, especially in a young age and when we're in a developmental phase, those can leave a mark that a lot of times we don't think of as abuse, but it has all the same characteristics.
Right. Yeah. Something personal in my own life was I realized that food security was a huge thing when we were younger, because we were on food stamps and welfare and all this stuff. And my mom did her best to try to make sure that we were, fed and all that. But then in doing my own work, I'm like, that actually impacts my whole relationship with nourishment and food and all of this stuff. And so, also it doesn't need to be trauma related. I also think that there's a wide range of content that can be within somebody that gets unearthed or unlocked in, psychedelic experiences as well, that are not related to traumatic events. They can be beliefs, emotions, stories, again, the way that we talk about ourselves, things that come up in relationships. So what I try to tell my clients is prepare for everything, or as much as you can. Build some tools around what you can't prepare for, so you have a little bit of a something to fall back on. And then to a degree, throw it all out the window, because you don't know what's actually going to come up in the psychedelic experience or not. If somebody prepares, this is so classic for me. I don't know if this is the same for you, and we might have mentioned this on past episodes, but the client who's like really ready to go to war with all of the parts of themselves, and then they come into an experience and it's much lighter and more graceful than that, they're like, oh, I was ready to like tear myself apart, and then now here I am having this type of experience.
Yep. I see that a lot too. It's kind of like the irony of Murphy's Law. It's like when you're prepared for cold weather, you get warm and vice versa. And and I definitely see that a lot. And I think that there's something to be said for the willingness to go there.
Yeah. I also think that that's a part of the unknown as well, meaning that inherent in the preparation for the unknown components of a psychedelic experience, what you're actually doing is you're opening yourself up to all the different possibilities. If you're going in expecting challenging, troubling, really doing the deep and hard work, then your system's going to be looking for that. And then anything that doesn't match up to that is there's a dissonance there. Conversely, I also have folks who are like, I want to commune with, greater consciousness and I want to have the spiritual experience and I all of that. And again, that's a pretty challenging bar to set if your experience doesn't like turn out that way. I think one of the most interesting dynamics that come up with clients is that they're always, not always, but for some clients, they're trying to like connect the dots in real time during an experience. So they're like going through something and they're like, what's this related to, or what's that, or is this what's the sign here, or what's this? And I tell people to like just slow up a little bit and just observe it, because it doesn't have to, the dots don't have to connect for whatever shift that's happening to occur. And so there's also like a lot of folks who have a big release, emotional release, energetic release, purging release. And sometimes it's helpful to like name that or identify that or say like, okay, what is this thing? And for some folks, they're like, I have no idea, but this is great. Like I feel much lighter having done whatever I just did there.
Totally. I mean, if I had $1 for every time someone said after a journey, well, that's not at all what I was expecting, I would be rich by now. Like
Yeah,
these things never go as you're expecting. And so I think that that's, we talk about expectations a lot on this show, but it does play a role in this. And so we often have an expectation of what's going to come up during the journey, and very rarely does it actually happen.
yeah,
And so the question once again is, are you ready, willing, and able to sit with something that you can't predict? You
sure.
may not even know it's there. And I think that's where a lot of this courage comes in, because it's really easy to say yes. And then you maybe find out about this core wound that happened at a very young age that's molded and shaped your whole trajectory of your life. And then, you know, at that point, do you still feel the same way? Do you still feel like you want to know what's there? And so this is, I think the reason that I feel called to record this episode is to really highlight for people that you have a decision to make. You have an internal decision that needs to be made about how ready and able you are to look at what's underneath the hood. And one of the things that you touched on wanting to talk about is like, well, what do we do when we find that material? And to me, a big piece of this comes down to support, because if you're wading through that material alone and unsupported, it becomes daunting, it becomes challenging, and those feelings of like hopelessness can start to kick in. And so to me, the antidote to this whole thing is having adequate support, knowing that what you may discover could totally shatter or rather illuminate different parts of your worldview in a way that just wasn't there before.
Yeah. Well, with the whole support piece, if you don't have support, then you end up sitting within an echo chamber of yourself. Stuff gets rattled around. You start doubting yourself. You're not sure what's valid or not valid. You're not sure what emotions are constructive or not constructive. I obviously hold a world where all emotions and feelings and content that comes up are welcomed in that preparation container and ceremonial container. But having a little bit of a backboard or somebody to express to or to organize like your thoughts with, even self-directed stuff like journaling or audio recordings are great ways to like get this stuff out of your mind, because it can really ricochet around in there a little. And what I also hear you saying is that when we started the intro here, we were saying being prepared to sit and accept the things that we're not aware of. And with what you just said, I think there's a step before that, which is a willingness, like a choice that exists before that. Like you have to choose and step into the courageousness of being like, okay, I do acknowledge that there's some unknown. I do acknowledge that there's some things that are beyond my cognition, and I'm willing to go there.
Right. And that's scary. But that to me is an essential part of this process for those who are earnest in their attempt to approach this work. I don't, I'll put it to you this way. I don't think it's a good idea for folks that answer no to that question to move forward with the ceremony.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
It's I don't know, it's almost like the you must be this tall to ride the ride. Like
In
like
order for the harness thing to come down and actually hold you.
right. Because like that to me, that's it's almost like if you answer no to that question and then move forward with a journey, you're almost asking for like destabilization or basically like a what could be thought of as like traditionally a bad trip or a adverse thing, because this whatever it is that's suppressed is coming up to the surface, and like you're not ready, willing, or able to deal with it, and that's like not a good scenario for most
Yeah,
people.
I'll acknowledge for many folks, they do find a lot of growth and healing through, for lack of a better term, like traumatic psychedelic experiences or bad, trips. I'm using air quotes here. The issue is, though, in our society, you usually don't have the right support system to help you through that. Because if you have a really traumatic psychedelic experience, what we're talking about in this context is a whole bunch of content and stuff gets brought up that you weren't ready for, that you don't have support and community with, that you don't have the honesty and transparency with yourself to navigate it, to acknowledge it and like move through it. Oftentimes those are the situations where you do need ongoing care in support groups, community groups, ongoing integration, maybe ongoing therapy work, maybe ongoing, whatever you believe in. Our society is not built like that, because usually you got to go back in and clock back in, or get back to work or whatnot. And that's also pretty damaging as well, when you have a deeply shifted experience that's rooted in difficulty, and you're like, well, I got to put this all on the shelf so I can like get back to work and pick up the kids and go do XYZ. So I think that's a great word of caution, I think, that you're sharing with
Yeah.
folks there.
I mean, the other thing that I see a lot when this kind of material surfaces is it's really easy to step into a victim mentality. Why is this happening to me? I was young. This shouldn't have happened. I don't want to know about this. It's like a interesting mix of like denial and feeling helpless, like that kind of victimhood state. And it can take some time to shift out of that when something is brought into your awareness that you didn't know was there.
Yeah. I want to get your opinion on something. I wonder what you think about folks who, I'm going to use some coin terms here, who feel like they're generally well adjusted, who feel like, okay, I can't really identify any major traumas or any, major things. What we're talking about has been on the lens of, okay, the psychedelic experience can likely uncover some stuff. Everyone goes through some range of trauma, in some severity. But then I also do chat with a couple of folks who are like, yeah, I'm feeling okay. Like, I don't think that there's any issues here. I haven't identified any traumas. I feel like I process and release things. What would you share with that person about this concept of like preparing for the unknown, or preparing for content that they might not be aware of?
I mean, from my perspective, we're all still subject to the filter that the conscious mind gives us. And no one's special in that they can access their subconscious material 24/7. And so I don't know, like what comes to mind for me is I took a consult with this guy finance dude out of the Bay Area, and he's like, I'm happy all the time. I'm a functioning human. I have no trauma. And I'm thinking to myself, you want to know how I know you have trauma? Is because you're telling me this and trying to jam it down my throat that you're fine and everything's okay with you. And the fact of the matter is we're human and we all go through life and have these experiences that shape and mold us. And you don't have to think about it as trauma, but there's certainly the possibility of memories of events of very significant formative experiences being brought into your awareness that you likely wouldn't have had access to otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, this is strategic going into a psychedelic experience, because what I hear you saying is that the belief on whether you have trauma or not is, at the end of the day, somewhat of a belief or a story. So if you come into a psychedelic experience being like, nope, I have no trauma, and then the psychedelic experience uncovers something really challenging and difficult, that's a
Double
really
whammy.
hard fall. That's a
Yeah.
really, really hard fall. So at best, or at least, it's a strategic tactical thing to walk in and being open to being like, okay, I acknowledge that I might not know everything that's stirring up within me. So then you can prepare for it. So I really, really
That
like what you're saying there.
that's the key. Like that's the key right there. And so what I want to spend a few minutes on is how do we help someone prepare for this? In
Yeah.
other
I
words,
want to get
what can
tangible
you
here.
as a in other words, what can you as a journeyer do in order to catalyze this process of starting to look under the hood, knowing you may not be able to get it all in prep, but at least you're starting to like flex the proverbial muscle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tell a lot of folks that preparation is really just a series of practice runs and dress rehearsals for what might come up or what might show itself in the psychedelic experience. And therefore, folks can utilize some tools and frameworks, the same ones that would help them to navigate. I think the first one that I want to start with is, this concept of like getting into the seat of the observer, the awareness, almost this trying to cultivate a level of like unattached awareness around whatever stuff comes up in prep. We share with folks that ceremony starts the moment that you are committed to doing this type of work, which can be years for some people before they actually have a psychedelic experience. Once ceremony starts, the pot gets stirred, meaning the content's going to come up, meaning you're going to start to make connections between your body, your mind, your spirit, and all of that. You're going to start to observe. And so what I share with folks is that as we're observing things, likely we become attached to them. Like even the way that we talk about feelings, like I am mad, that's you saying I am the existence of anger, right now. And so I think the first thing for folks is to almost have a neutral, curious, open stance around what they're feeling, what's going on in their body, what memories and things are coming up. I think that's probably the core of all of the other tools and frameworks that I, recommend to folks in doing this work.
Yeah, for me, what it comes down to in prep is starting to get access to the subconscious mind beforehand. And there's really only a couple of ways that I've discovered firsthand that gets access to that part of ourselves. One is through meditation, one is through journaling, and the other is through the actual psychedelic experience itself. But basically, we have to get ourselves into a state where we start to transcend that thinking mind and get access to the material that's beneath the surface. And this is inherently challenging because if you're not an experienced meditator or you don't have a journaling practice, we're talking about starting new habits that you don't have the kind of muscle memory for during prep.
Yeah, I
And
think one
and
of the good guiding, or I guess bridges to meditation, is probably guided meditation to start. If you have like no meditation background at all, There's a lot of great resources. The Waking Up app, which is Sam Harris's. There's a whole bunch of stuff on YouTube. I'm pretty sure that that was how it started for me, is finding little 10-15 minute guided meditations that then open the door for more introspective contemplation.
Exactly. And so for a lot of folks, that's like the slow lane to the
Mm-hmm.
subconscious, whereas the psychedelic experience is like, the fast lane rocket ship all the way in. But at least we're starting that process of getting you access to what's beneath the surface. And the same thing that happens journaling with like stream of consciousness style writing is you're bypassing that sensor. You're bypassing that part of your cognitive mind that goes, oh, that's stupid. Why are you writing that? Oh, that's spelled wrong. Oh, put a period there. Oh, edit that. Oh, do you really want to say that? If we
Mm-hmm.
can move past that and just allow the words to come through you and onto the page, it's amazing the insights and material that starts to surface in a form of stream of consciousness journaling like that.
Yeah, so I would probably encapsulate all of that into play around with your filters in your sober default state, and meditation, yoga, breath work, journaling. Those are all methods of playing around with your state of consciousness, which filters things
Yep.
through your cognitive mind. Another thing that I share with folks is getting comfortable sitting in uncomfortability. And I actually think that that can show up in a lot of different ways. There's plenty of times in the day where we can be angry about something or uncomfortable about something, whether it's a conversation or somebody cuts us off on the road or something doesn't go right at work, which may not be related to the psychedelic experience. But I share with folks, like, use that period as a time where you're like, this is uncomfortable. These feelings are going to come up, and I'm literally just going to sit here and watch it and feel how I'm feeling. And I think that over time, folks can get some reps. That also helps with that, like, detached observer thing that I'm talking
Yep.
about. And
Yep.
then also, in another benefit of this is that you start to open your own emotional filters on what's acceptable or not acceptable to feel, think, and be like. So I have a lot of folks who are like, oh, I'm catching myself being angry, and I know that I need to be more compassionate and more. Well, if anger's coming up for you pretty frequently, it probably means that there's something there that needs to be looked at, addressed, or sat
Pretending
with.
it's not there is bypassing. We have a word for that.
Yeah, 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 100%. And so then it's like, okay, how do I find a healthy, constructive way to sit in my anger
Yep.
or sit in my
Or sadness
frustration?
or grief or whatever it
Totally,
is.
totally. And maybe that's like, I don't want to be around my kids and my partner when I'm in the state of anger. So let me go and find myself another place where I can actually sit and like feel this stuff. Because for many folks, stuff comes up, we make a snap judgment about it, and then we're already in action about it.
Yep.
Whether we allow it to happen or not, I think, is going back to this like resistance conversation. And
Totally.
so for folks, I share with people that you should have the right to express and feel every color of your rainbow, including like in the ceremony, of course, but it's really, really helpful in prep, I think, to
Yep.
start to exercise, those things in
The,
advance.
the final tangible piece for prep that I feel called to share is just make sure that you've thought through your support system before, but especially after the journey, when you're raw, when you're vulnerable, when things may have surfaced that you didn't know were there. Do you have someone to call on? Do you have someone to lean on? Do you have support outside of your facilitator that allows you to feel like you're navigating this, with the help of others, not just solely on your own?
Yeah, I think about support as far as concentric circles. In the middle, there's you, and then the circle right around that are like, those, hopefully you have those people that you can call 24/7, anytime. A layer around that might be professional support, a coach, integration specialist, mental health professional, teacher, you know,
Yep.
something of that layer, and then you can even build concentric circles around that. Maybe it's community, maybe it's a group that you're, you know, in. And so just think about your support as far as layers, knowing that they are there. And then I also know that there's a lot of folks who don't feel like they have that. They feel like they're kind of out floating out there on their own. Maybe their only relationship is with their facilitator. And so that's where I think you need to just take this one step at a time as far as building trust in those relationships so that you can maybe lean on those folks if you go through a larger emergence process through a psychedelic experience. And that stuff takes time. That stuff takes a
And a
lot of time.
willingness to reach out for help.
Sure. Yeah. Really,
So
really
don't be
important.
shy. Please reach out if you need it. And I want to make sure that we end with, a sort of words of encouragement here. Like, if you are one of those people that this does happen to, or you have had this happen where something gets unearthed during a journey that you didn't even know was there and you maybe weren't prepared for, I acknowledge how jarring, how shocking, how surprising that can be. It can be almost traumatic in and of itself, but it's always worth it to work through it.
Mm.
It seems hard. It seems challenging. I've heard a lot of sentiment of like, wish I just didn't know this was there. But it is always worth it to work through that on your time, on your cadence, in the way that you need to. But pretending it's not there is not the answer.
That does way more damage, if anything.
Yep.
Because if you've unearthed something and then it comes into your conscious mind and then you're trying to like cram it back down into whatever crevice it was living, that can be really, really damaging. Even if you wake up every day and continue on like, you know, everything is all good, because there are unconscious components of this. This is the crux of what we're talking about.
Pandora
And
doesn't go back in the box.
yeah, that's what I was thinking about earlier. Yeah.
Anything else that you want to share with listeners around this topic today, Jim?
You know, the only thing that comes up for me is to not underestimate the power of your breath as you are moving through some of these things. There have been many of my own psychedelic experiences where all that I could do was to return back to my breath and be aware of the breath, using the breath as an anchor, a lifeline, a tether, a support. I found that to be probably the number one way of navigating unknown content as it comes up in prep and ceremony and even integration, because it brings you back to presence. And again, it sounds silly, I know, but I've also seen it work for myself and like hundreds and hundreds of other people. And so don't underestimate the breath. I think, I forget where I heard this, but somebody said that the breath is the only thing that stays with you from the moment that you're born to the moment that you die. And so if you do find yourself having stuff stir up, unknown content, stuff that makes you real squirmy, stuff that makes you really uncomfortable, the stuff that you're like, I don't even know what's there, but it's freaking out my nervous system. The best thing that you can do is observe, breathe, bring awareness to your breath, and then just kind of be easy on yourself a little bit too, because this is, like you said, a dynamic process.
Yep. Thank you for adding that. And that made me think of one thing that I feel called to just give a quick disclaimer on, is that sometimes content comes up that may or may not be literal. And so sometimes the way that these plants, specifically mushrooms, teach us is through direct experience, through metaphor, through analogy, through allowing us to feel something as if we're in someone else's shoes. And so we need to use our own internal knowing, our own intuition to discern, like, okay, is this a verbatim memory that happened to me when I was younger, or is this just a point that I need to understand and feel in order to learn, grow, and evolve. And so not all topics that get surfaced are verbatim or factually 100% accurate. And so just use some discernment as you navigate this. And that's part of what integration's for. You know, Jimmy spoke on this earlier, is you don't have to connect the dots in real time. You can experience it in real time. And then in integration go, was that a factually accurate memory, or was I just, my subconscious feeding an example of what things, may have looked like?
Yeah, don't take things too literal is
Right.
my takeaway there, because I've had folks who have moved through experiences and they're like, yeah, I felt into the suffering of my ancestor during the Holocaust, or I felt into a certain thing. And that doesn't obviously mean that you are like Jesus Christ and that you are on the cross, but like if you are feeling those things, it's important not to invalidate them. I also hear you saying, where there can be a basis of discovery, and by not taking it super literal, it actually opens up all the different avenues and lanes on which you can process, dissect, look at that thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you all for listening. You can download and stream episodes of the Psychedelic Passage podcast on all major streaming platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you choose to digest your podcast content. If you like the show, please rate and leave us a review. It means a lot to us and to other folks who are exploring our wonderful podcast. We'll see you next week.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast, republication, or retransmission of this program without proper consent is prohibited.